everyone, welcome to the May 29th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I am David Aragona, back with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski. After a little bit of a break last week, we took one podcast off. I know Craig had some extra work to do, my fault, covering the morning line for me, and I was very grateful to Craig for doing that. I was on a little bit of a vacation, went up to Maine for a few days to Acadia National Park, which was just absolutely beautiful. But back now and ready to get back into the swing of things, Craig, and a lot of racing for me to catch up on. I kind of always forget how much racing takes place on one of these holiday weekends, but when you've got the 3 days of stakes action from Saturday through Monday, there was a lot to look back on, and I think there were some pretty good performances this past weekend.
Yeah, there were. There was quite a bit of racing. I kind of forget too, being a former East Coast guy, New York doesn't really have as strong of a Memorial Day card as they used to because they've shifted a lot to Belmont Stakes weekend. But everything else, I mean, there were lots of good races around the country. And not that the Belmont at the Big A didn't have some nice races. They did. It's just not as heavy as some others. And there were some really big figures that kind of surprised me, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's okay. Not every big track has to race, at the top level on the holidays, and I think that allowed for a track like Santa Anita to really have the spotlight shown on them on Monday's Memorial Day card because they really did put on a good card. We're going to actually start by talking about Santa Anita, where they ran those three graded stakes races, including a couple of Grade One events. We can debate whether or not they should be grade ones, but that's a topic for another time on that Memorial Day Monday card. And we'll begin there at Santa Anita. We'll then move on through Belmont at the Big A to talk about a couple of the stakes races there for the 3-year-olds, the Pennine Ridge and the Wonder again. Churchill Downs, they ran a stakes on Saturday. That was the Kirtana, an interesting race flow there that we'll definitely talk about a little bit later in the podcast. And then we'll finish things up by mentioning a few races each from Monmouth, Lone Star, Gulfstream, all which had stakes action this past weekend, and then one race from Woodbine at the very end of the podcast if you make it there. Well, Craig, let's begin with that Santa Anita Monday card, and we'll talk about those two Grade 1 events on the turf. First, then I'll share my screen to show the TimeformUS chart for the 11th race of the day, which was the Grade 1 Shoemaker Mile. And this one was won by the Tim Yakteen trainee, Johannes, a 4-year-old, a horse that had shown a lot of promise during his 3-year-old season, but went to the sidelines. But he's come back this year now with 2 starts as a 4-year-old, and he has looked awesome both times, won his prep for this, and then earned his first Grade 1 victory in this Shoemaker Mile.
Yeah, this horse is really good. You mentioned that maybe this isn't really a Grade 1 anymore, but I wouldn't argue with anybody that wanted to say he is a Grade 1 horse. He's one of those, he kind of gets overlooked as a member of that strong 4-year-old group of turf horses that we've been talking about. Part of it because he got hurt. I assume he got hurt because he was off like 11 months and didn't come back until April. But other than that one blemish, the race where he was sent to the sidelines, he's been perfect. And not just has he been perfect, I mean, he usually wins pretty easily. And I think he's a really versatile horse. He's shown good tactical speed in his starts. It's not like he's this deep closer that, has to have pace in front of him. He's been close to fast paces and it hasn't affected him. So I think this is actually a really good runner out west. We kind of sometimes, downgrade the West Coast horses a little bit, but I don't think he's one of them.
Yeah, he has topped out at this 120 TimeformUS speed figure, which was the best he's earned so far last Monday. But he feels like a horse that might be able to take that next step forward, Craig. Like you said, it's always tough to gauge how this West Coast turf form would translate to a Breeders' Cup or even a major Grade 1 race on the East Coast, where you typically have some more competitive fields. But I don't disagree with you. This was a pretty good running of the Shoemaker Mile. Primarily because the runner-up, Fantastic Again, I thought ran huge in defeat, a horse that I wasn't really sure what you should expect from for Wesley Ward, trying this ambitious spot, shipping out to the West Coast, something he doesn't do that often. But I thought he ran extremely well in defeat because this was a race that did feature an honest pace. None of the fractions are color-coded red, but they were certainly moving up front, and Fantastic Again had to let sort of that runoff Goliad go, and that horse got a little aggressive through the early stages and came back to get that one, and still was battling back at the end, trying to hold off Johannes, who at the end of the day was just a slightly superior horse. And I'll pull up the replay. We'll show part of this Shoemaker Mile. I I just thought he ran very well. No real excuses for the third place finisher de jour, who did get some pace to close into. And I'm thinking that the fig he got for that Shoemaker mile, in retrospect, looks a little high. I'm not sure that he's really a 126 kind of horse.
Yeah, it's one of those, it was tough at the time to make. I'll have to go back and revisit it. But I mean, he's a good horse. He's shown on some other occasions. He's kind of an in and out horse too. He runs well or he runs bad. But yeah, he's maybe that figure's a little high. But getting to what you said as far as the runner up, I really liked what I saw from him. I mean, you mentioned Goliad. He is a really fast horse, and Fantastic again was able to he dueled with him, but I like that Frankie Dettori realized that's probably not the way to go, backed off of him a little bit. And, he was game all the way to the wire. So he's a horse who's done well on synthetic, but it's not like his turf races haven't been good. This is only the third time he's tried it. He's yet to win, but I think he's a stakes horse on the grass.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's funny. Fantastic again has actually never even won a turf race. Wesley Ward has focused on other surfaces. I think the consensus was that he was probably best on synthetic, but he seemed to handle the turf very well here. And you could see in this replay how game he is when the eventual winner Johannes does come to him. And it did always look watching this race like Johannes was going to win. He just always travels really well, but he doesn't put this one away as easily as you might have thought coming to the top of the stretch. That's de jour closing down the center of the course. He is pretty wide, but he had saved a lot of ground prior to that. So kind of think that the result of this race, 1, 2, 3, they were the three best horses in that order. And I'll be interested to see where Johannes goes from here. Well, let's talk about that other grade one on this card, Craig. That is the Gamely. And I agree with you. I think that the Shoemaker Mile, not egregious that it has not been downgraded. That sort of race that has produced some nice fields and shippers from the East Coast. And I think that you could argue that's one of the more legitimate grade one races in Southern California these days. The Gamely is a race that should have been downgraded from grade one status a long time ago. If you look through the prior winners of this race, it's as a comedian would say, it's a who's who of who. Just horses you don't really remember, horses that have not really made a major impact on this division. Now, not the case for Anisette, Craig. She is now a three-time grade one winner, but Anisette has won three of the most undeserving grade one races that there are in the Del Mar Oaks, the American Oaks, and now this Gamely. So I kind of put the grade one winner in quote, the three-time grade one winner in quotation marks. I don't want to knock her. She's a nice horse to own, and she's done a lot of winning for the connections, and she's clearly one of the stars of that West Coast turf division. But she was beating a couple of East Coast shippers who are not exactly grade one quality.
No, to say the least. And I think those horses were out west to take a shot because they know they really can't compete in these races back east. But Anisette, she's fine. The speed figures kind of show what she is. I think if she was running and on the East Coast, she might be a nice grade three type. A three-time grade winner just doesn't really match. We've talked about it before. I get they don't want to strip California of all their top grade ones, but at some point we're going to get to where you almost have to, because I mean, if Anisette was to run in a race like the Breeders' Cup, she's going to be a gigantic price and have very little chance. And that's not what you would expect from a three-time grade one winner.
Yeah, I mean, not to get too much on the soapbox, but I mean, if I were in charge of the graded stakes committee, which obviously I'm not, and it's mostly run by breeders and owners and racetrack executives, and not so much by horse players and handicappers, which is probably the kinds of people that should be making these decisions. I would slash like half of the grade one races. It doesn't make sense to have so many stakes races on the level of the Breeders' Cup or the Kentucky Derby, the Classics. I mean, there needs to be some distinction between races at those level, the true championship races, and just these grade two and grade three races that they're allowing to masquerade as grade one events, like the prep races for the Kentucky Derby, where it's basically mandated that the best horses in the division are going to be split up among four races. That's not a championship event by definition when all of the horses are not going to be showing up there. So I think that there is a much better way to do the graded stake system. I don't have much hope it's going to change, though, because the complexion of that committee is not going to be overturned anytime soon. We did just show the replay of the Gamely, Craig, and I thought Anisette got a good trip. disappointing performance, I thought, from Ruby Nell, who was the co-favorite in this race, sort of ran off on the front end. Not like the pace was that fast, though, and she just threw in the towel, really had nothing left late. As for those two East Coast shippers, Olivia Meralda and Forever After All, they ran fine. Perhaps Olivia Meralda struck the front a little bit too soon. I do think she's one that has some potential for trainer Will Walden, just making the second start in the US, but she's going to face some tougher company if she tries grade one races back east.
Yeah, and I mean the fact these two horses ran 2-3 just they kind of backs up what we said. This is not really a grade one race, but it is what it is. And you know, Anisette's a nice filly, and I'm sure she'll keep running well in California in graded stakes.
Between those two grade one events, they ran the grade two Gold Cup. I don't know if this is still called the Hollywood Gold Cup, but that's the race that it used to be. Now it's the Gold Cup at Santa Anita. The winner of this race, Craig, Mr. Fisk, one of two Bob Baffert trainees. Obviously, Bob Baffert sent out the winning exacta in this race. Mr. Fisk got the job done. Very good trip and ride from Kazushi Kimura. Obviously, the main story of this race is that Mr. Fisk was unsaddled on the clubhouse turn, came out of this race with a condylar fracture, and sounds like the prognosis is going to be good. Bob Baffert did tweet out from his account that the horse is, I think, was going to have surgery today as we're recording this on Wednesday, and they're expected to make a full recovery. So crossing our fingers and hoping all is well down the line for the winner of this race, Mr. Fisk. But I guess we'll talk about his performance anyway, Craig, even though we're probably not going to see him on the racetrack again anytime soon. He ran well, got a nice speed figure. I don't know how much credit I want to give a horse, though, for beating Reincarnate, who just seems to let anybody pass him in the stretch.
Yeah, now this is a race which has been downgraded recently. It was a grade one for forever. It is as the Hollywood Gold Cup, and even after it shifted to Santa Anita. And I think that fits. This feels like kind of a grade two race at best. And Mr. Fisk is fine. I mean, obviously, I wish him nothing but the best. I hope he's able to recover and get back on the track because he's okay. He had won the Californian last time and did it contesting a really, not contesting, but overcoming a slow pace from kind of the back of the field that day in a small field, got an upgraded 121. This was a race with a more legitimate pace set by his stablemate Reincarnate. He basically stayed in the same position, just a couple lengths off of it, made his move, and was just much the best. Now, I don't know what was in behind him, really. It's the 123 speed figure. If you told me he was going to run that before the race or even the 121, he'd probably be a 4 to 5 horse in this field because the others just haven't really been able to run better than that.
Yeah, I think the one horse that maybe handicappers might have had hopes for to run that speed figure would be Judge Miller, who was ultimately third in this race because he had run that huge figure two back, or I think now three back in that 11 length allowance score. I just get the sense that he's a horse that really wants no part of a mile and a quarter. He won that allowance race going a mile, didn't really get the 9 furlongs in the California next time. Now they ran him a mile and a quarter in the Gold Cup, and it just seemed like he's not really finishing off these races. So I think he could be maybe the best of this bunch down the line. I just feel like he's a horse that's ultimately going to want to go a little bit shorter. We're taking a look at the stretch drive here. Mr. Fisk is just the horse that is clearly staying the distance at the end as he pulls away from this field. And he'll put in some choppy strides after the wire, and got to give commendations to his jockey, Kazushi Kimura, who did a very good job dismounting and pulling him up around the clubhouse turn, because you don't want to, keep weight on a horse when you feel something's a little off like that. And even in the heat of the moment, good on him to make that move. And a nice horse, but one that I don't think we're going to see on the racetrack for a while, if ever again, in Mr. Fisk.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you about Judge Miller. I think we had said that the last time, that he looked like a horse that a mile and an eighth was just too far, and I was really surprised to see him in for a mile and a quarter. He looks like a horse could be a really good sprinter to me, maybe a miler, but he's got some talent. It's just that was too far.
Yeah, he might have been an interesting horse in a race like the Met Mile. Obviously, he's not going to run in there now, but doesn't seem like it's coming up as one of the vintage editions of that race. So I think it's the kind of spot where you might want to look for a horse like a Judge Miller. Obviously, he won't be an option in that race, but I do think maybe the one-turn races could be the best option for him down the line. I agree, Craig. Well, before we move away from that Memorial Day card at Santa Anita, we have to talk about the race that was contested right before those three stakes events. That was a maiden special weight going 6 furlongs. And the story of this race was the debut of Eagle's Flight, who, of course, is the younger half brother to Flightline, that undefeated sensation who won the Pacific Classic and the was Horse of the Year, the Breeders' Cup. I mean, needs no introduction. I don't have to run down Flightline's resume. One of the most talented horses of the past couple of decades that we've seen on the track. So obviously, some pretty big shoes for Eagle's Flight to fill, Craig, but certainly took a step in the right direction with this debut victory.
Yeah, I almost felt like I know you're not a huge basketball fan like I am, but like LeBron James's son is going to turn pro this year, and he just has these huge expectations because of his name and who his father is. And I kind of had the same feeling with this one. This horse kind of delivered. I mean, he ran a great race, obviously, got a 110 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. I thought he had a really good trip. If you listen to the call of the race, they made it out that like he was in a bunch of trouble. I don't really see that when I watched the race. I think he was pretty clear all the way. What I did like about the trip is, sometimes you get these maidens and these 6 furlong races and they just go to the lead and win easy and you're not really sure what you have. But this horse was able to, he dropped back a little bit and it gave the indication that going a 2 turn shouldn't be any issue at all for him.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that, Craig. It was a very good trip in terms of getting through and saving ground early, but you do like to see that professionalism in a horse's debut because it might have been a concern that he didn't have the most early speed breaking from post two, and he showed no problem taking that kick back and coming through between horses. And you can see at the end of the race here, he's trying to lug in maybe just a little bit, but he's got this really nice way of moving as he strides onto the wire away from the runner-up, who was a horse who had already run some fast speed figures, Craig. That Santa Anita, he was the clear second choice in this race, and he had come in with that huge speed figure of 120 when I believe he was second to the very fast Vlahos. But even if you take that out of his form, his prior speed figure suggested that the 110 that Eagles Flight got for this race is very much a legitimate number, and Eagles Flight clearly was going away from him at the end like a horse that's not going to have any trouble with the distance. Like I said, he's the half brother of Flightline. Flightline was by Tappet. This one is by Curlin. So certainly a similar stamina influence there. And you would expect that his next test is going to be a race that's a little longer. Whether they stretch him out around 2 turns or do a route next time out remains to be seen. But clearly, this is a horse with a lot of promise. And that's probably what we'd be saying about him, even if we didn't know the pedigree, Craig. This was just a really promising debut for a 3-year-old.
Yeah, like there were some maidens in here who had run a couple at least triple digit TimeformUS speed figures. So this was no cakewalk, and he won pretty easy. And the 110 is a really nice figure, even for a little bit older horse making a belated debut. But I mean, he showed some real talent. So I look forward to seeing him run again for sure.
Let's turn back the calendar to Sunday at Santa Anita to talk about both graded stakes that they ran on this card. One of those was the Santa Margarita. This one going the 1.125 distance for the older fillies and mares. Not a whole lot to say about this race, Craig. Adair Manor got the job done, 1-9. We're having a slight glitch with the speed figures in the TimeformUS charts, but we can verbalize that Adair Manor got a 119 for this performance, which right in line with her usual effort, Craig, but clearly was not tested on this day.
Yeah, this was one. She got a 119. The final time was a 121, but she was allowed to just set a slow pace on the front end, wasn't challenged at all. I think the fractions, you won't see it in the chart as of yet because of that glitch, but they're all in blue except the opening quarter. So at the end of the day, this was just kind of a paid workout. The runner-up, Coffee in Bed, ran fine. She improved a little bit, and it was just a race where Adair Manor kind of had the field over a barrel. I say she had an easy lead. It's not like there were others in here you thought maybe the 2-horse Super Shine could have challenged her, but she had shown a lot of speed in her first race in the Santa Maria, but for whatever reason didn't do so here. And once that happened, it was over.
And she's got that grade one victory under her belt, having won the Apple Blossom. It sounds like now Bob Baffert's plan is to just keep her in Southern California and run through the series there, like the Clement Del Hirsch and the Summer at Del Mar, until obviously they get to the Breeders' Cup, which makes sense. I mean, maybe there's some temptation to try the more prestigious grade ones on the East Coast, but they already won that race at Oaklawn. So I guess that they're just going to try to get to the Breeders' Cup a similar way that they got last year and hope for a better result. She's really good, but I worry a little bit that she's just going to be facing a lot of fields like this all the way up until the fall.
Yeah, and I think there's something to that when you just have easy race after easy race. And let's say the Apple Blossom was a grade one. It wasn't the strongest grade one we're ever going to see. And, the Breeders' Cup, it's going to be a completely different story if she gets there. Probably getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I like to see horses be a little more battle tested than she is likely going to be.
And the last race of the day on that Sunday card was the Grade 3 Daytona. This one, 6.5 furlongs down the hill, won in gate to wire fashion by Mucho del Oro for Doug O'Neill, a horse that has done well since being claimed by the Doug O'Neill barn. 2 for 4 since the claim. I think he's just a nose shy of being 3 for 4, and clearly a horse that really relishes this downhill sprint.
Yes, he had only tried it, I think, one time before the claim in an allowance race, and he won that day. And Doug O'Neill has wasted no time getting him back on the hill. I think all 4 of his starts now have come down the hill. He now has 2 wins. He lost one by a nose, all in stakes races. So this horse is one who's looking like he has some real talent as a turf sprinter. Now, obviously, that 6.5 down the hill doesn't always translate to other places, but he did run a 119 TimeformUS speed figure, which I believe is his career best by, I think, 115 in his prior couple starts was the best he ever run. So he does appear to be a horse that's improving in the new barn, even at the age of 6.
Yeah, and you could say he spurts away here at the top of the stretch. Looks like he's going to win a little easier than he does in the end, but setting those paces can be pretty taxing going to 6.5. And you could see the distance catches up with him a little bit right at the end here as the favorite first piece takes a shot at him late, but Mucho del Oro did have enough to hold on. They tried some different tactics on first piece in this race. He had actually contested the pace, a faster pace in the prior start when Mucho del Oro had faded after getting that pressure applied to him. In this race, sat a little further back, tried to win the race by making that late run, but I think it just allowed Mucho del Oro to get a little bit too comfortable on the front end, and he had enough to earn the victory, getting a 119 TimeformUS speed figure, the same number as a Dare Manor. Let's move on to New York and talk about 2 of those graded stakes races run this past weekend at Belmont at the Big A. Saturday's feature race was the 7th on the card, the Grade 2 Pennine Ridge. This one for the 3-year-olds, a prep for the Belmont Derby that they're going to be running a little bit later in the summer. And I think we've seen stronger crops for the 3-year-old turf horses, Craig, stronger editions of races like this. Small fields in both of these, the Pennine Ridge and the Wonder again. And Legend of Time, one of these Charlie Appleby trainees who is apparently embarking on a U.S. campaign this year. A little disappointing when we first saw him in the American turf, but we talked about it in the aftermath of that race. Probably not the right trip for this horse that day. I think Joel Rosario made the necessary adjustments this time.
Yeah, he did. That was a pretty brutal trip, especially pace-wise at Churchill Downs. And he ran fine. It kind of made sense. The bettors didn't back off of him, even bet him more heavier here in a smaller field. And he was able to get the job done. I imagine those who bet him had a few anxious moments as they were turning from home, as he was still towards the back of the pack. But he was pretty relentless through the lane. Once he got clear, it was Joel Rosario pulling one of his usual moves where when he wins races, somehow he was able to find a hole at the rail. And I think he really needed to, because if he'd had to tip out even to the tooth path, I'm not sure he would have got up to beat the White Palomino.
Yeah, I agree. He was very patient. I think that's the way you need to ride this horse because you can see right here. I mean, the number two, Legend of Time. He's a horse that travels in the bridle. He's got that tendency to get a little keen. And I think when he got that trip at Churchill, the big problem was that he had no cover and he just wanted to run off, seeing daylight in front of him every step of the way. And Joel just kept this horse covered up for as long as he possibly could. And like you said, I mean, he's waiting a long time here until that seam materializes in the final furlong here. And he knew what he had underneath him because the horse had enough to get up to win, did save all the ground, but seemed like he ran the best race of any of these, given the pace situation, which was fair. I don't think it was a pace that favored any particular kind of running style, and he was able to just get up on the wire. White Palomino, I thought he ran well. No real excuse, got to save all the ground, cutting those fractions. Royal Majesty maybe got going a little bit too late, but hard to argue that he ran any better than the winner.
No, yeah, I saw a lot of talk that maybe Royal Majesty was the best horse in the race, but as I went back and watched, I just didn't see it. I mean, you can't, I wouldn't argue that Legend of Time wound up with a better trip, but it was pretty dicey for a little while. Junior Alvarado took the more safe route on Royal Majesty, and he just wasn't good enough at the end of the day.
Let's move on to the 3-year-old filly division and talk about the Grade 2 Wonder again, which was contested on Monday, very early in the day at Belmont at the Big A, the second race on the card, before rain came later in the day and washed the rest of these races off the turf. And Chad Brown, Craig, sent out a strong hand in here. I believe he had 3 of the 6 runners in this race. The one that attracted all of the public's attention, unsurprisingly, was the number 6, Sweet Rebecca, who was 2 for 2 in her career, looked very promising in her victory at Aqueduct. Prior to this, was purchased for what I believe to be a very large sum out of her debut by Resolute Racing, who was John Stewart, making a lot of private and auction purchases these days. I know the initial plan was to send Sweet Rebecca to Royal Ascot, and Chad Brown kind of called an audible to target this race instead. And from the looks of it, maybe she wouldn't have been up to Royal Ascot after all, because this was not the same horse that we had seen in the prior 2 starts. Just never really seemed like she was going to deliver that late kick that we had grown accustomed to seeing in her first 2 races. And it opened the door to some others in here. And another Chad Brown trainee stepped right on through. That was Segesta, who got a very confident ride from Irad Ortiz to win this race.
Yeah, there was a really nice ride by Irad Ortiz. It gets to look like she could be on the front in this race, but Curlin's Girl went out there, set a quick pace, and he was confident just reading off of that one. And it was a good effort by her and a nice ride. Sweet Rebecca, I mean, I made her the morning line favorite if memory serves. I never would have guessed 3 to 5. And maybe part of that is just my own handicapping. She was a horse who looked impressive in her first 2, but they were races with blue fractions. And this was a race where the pace was pretty quick. I think almost all of them were in red for this race, and it's just a different kind of race. Some horses can handle both, but it didn't look like Sweet Rebecca did here. Now, she ran so poor, maybe there was something else going on as well, other than the pace just being a lot faster than she's used to. I just wanted to make the point that that's something to beware of, that she hadn't really shown it, even though she's a closer closing into a slow pace. Until they do it into a fast pace, you don't really know.
Craig, we might not be the biggest fans of Irad Ortiz and the way that he conducts himself on the racetrack all of the time, but you can see in this ride why he's one of the best because Suggestion was actually leading. She broke on top heading into that clubhouse turn. And I don't know if it was between calls or before the first call, but she was in front of Curlin's Girl. And Irad made that decision to take her back off the pace, sensing that they were going a little bit too fast. And he allowed the horses to pass him, including stablemate Sweet Rebecca, and ended up working out that perfect pocket trip, whereas he forced Tyler Gaffleone and Sweet Rebecca to sort of go forward and get that uncovered trip. Now, Sweet Rebecca probably didn't run her race anyway, but clearly Irad Ortiz was able to force everybody else to maybe get a worse trip than him based on having that filly who had the tactical speed to go to the front and then take back. And you can see here in mid-stretch, I mean, he's barely asking her. It seemed like he was very cognizant of not wanting to hit the front too soon on Suggestion because she had hung a little bit in a prior start of Tampa Bay Downs, and he waited a long time to ask her, and she did have enough left to hold on. Like you said, fast pace. A closer did come up for second in this race, but that one really was very much with the flow. And I think you've got to give Suggestion the credit for going out, being forward for that opening quarter, then taking back and coming on at the end. It's not like she was totally with the race flow. So I think it was a good effort by the winner. Still not sure where these 3-year-old fillies really fit in terms of the overall picture, who's best in this division. We've seen so little of them. I know that there were some good performances in high speed figures earned in Florida. That race on, I believe it was Oaks Day, the Edgewood, that was run over a turf course that had some give to it. So hard to really sort out this 3-year-old filly division right now, but we should learn a lot more about them when they get to that Belmont Oaks, which hopefully turns out to be a good race.
Yeah, and just a quick thing on Irad. I'm sure neither of us have ever given the impression. Yes, we've talked about his antics at times, but I know for sure that we both think he is one of the very best, if not the best rider in the game.
100% agree on that. I think the results speak for themselves when it comes to Irad Ortiz. Let's move on to Churchill Downs, Greg, and we'll begin with the stakes race that they ran on Saturday there. That was the Kirtana, real test of stamina for the fillies and mares going the 1.5 mile distance. And I think it turned into a greater test of stamina than anybody was bargaining for when the number 6, Sand and Sea, went out on this mission almost as if I mean, I know Ray Luke Gutierrez was aware that it was a 1.5 mile race, but he let this filly run off like they were going 5 furlongs. I mean, she was going way too fast, especially for that Churchill Downs turf course, which we've seen can be pretty demanding on horses, and you really need some stamina to win going basically any distance there. And you'll notice some rarely seen TimeformUS pace figures for the first couple of calls for Sand and Sea.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I forgot to go look at them. We wrote an article about the 200 plus TimeformUS pace figure, and I see now that Sand and Sea got one of those with a 215. It's kind of just the way she runs. I'm not sure what Raylu Gutierrez could have done. She just always kind of runs off like that. She was a horse we had shown way in front on the pace projector. And if we didn't limit what that was, it would have been even bigger than what it shows. And she's a horse that just kind of turned it into a real test of stamina because the others had to go faster. Even if you forget her and look at the other pace figures of the other horses in here, they all ran quicker than what they're used to doing. And it just set up perfectly for Atomic Blonde, who was at the back of the pack early, just kind of taking things in behind and taking over and getting the job done for Christophe Clement, running a really nice 122 TimeformUS speed figure. I would say Chop Chop, who got the same speed figure, ran really well. She just kind of was a victim of that pace being closer up and kind of inherited the lead maybe a little bit early.
Yeah, it was one of those races where you really did want to be the horse that made the last move. And watching this race, it almost looked coming around the far turn like Tyler Gaffalione was waiting too long. Like, what are you doing? You're saving ground in behind 2 horses that are going nowhere. And ultimately, it turned out that he was making the right move because it seemed like Vergara and Chop Chop had broken away from the pack at the top of the stretch. But by the time they got to the final furlong, those were 2 tired horses, especially Vergara. Chop Chop tried to battle back, but Atomic Blonde was just one pace, staying on, and was able to get the distance and get the job done. I will say, Craig, the 122 speed figure seems just a tad high for these horses, but you can sometimes see that in races that have very fast paces. It can sort of drag everybody along to run their maximum final time, and maybe they won't run quite as fast in the future start if the pace isn't as fast.
Yeah, I could see that for the top 2, maybe Vigera, but you can see the bottom 3 in the field just completely fell apart. These are the toughest ones to make speed figures for because basically 3 of the horses you had to toss out and you're only left with 3 more to make a speed figure from. It's not like they ran a bunch of 1.5 mile races on the card. Of course, it was only this one.
Well, let's talk about one more race from Churchill. That was a Memorial Day maiden event, actually the final race on the card on Memorial Day. The 9th race won by world record. This a second-time starter for trainer Rudy Brissett. A horse who would run well on debut at Keeneland, sort of staying on at the end, a close finish, just missed finishing 3rd that day, but showed much better early speed this day, breaking from the inside, got out to the front end, and just kept finding more to put this field away quite impressively to the tune of a strong 119 Timeform US speed figure.
Yeah, this was one I had to do a double take when I was making the speed figures, but everything checked out. I mean, it's the runner up ran a better figure than he's been doing, but for everybody else, it just seemed to kind of fit. It fit in with the rest of the day. It was just a really fast race. And Rudolph Brissett, he's a guy who doesn't really do well, doesn't send his first time starters out cranked up. And this one actually ran pretty well first time out and ran a good 104 speed figure. So seeing that big jump second time out is not a huge surprise. I mean, it's a really big number for a 3-year-old, but he's a horse who obviously has some talent, and I'll be interested to see how far this horse can go. His breeding, not sure much about the female side. Maybe you can lend a little to that, but we've seen many a gun runners be able to handle the 2 turns.
Yeah, I thought he showed some stamina in this victory. I mean, got one red color coded pace figure. The pace was certainly honest, and he just kept finding more to draw away from this field. As you said, gun runners, they can do anything. The dam herself, not a whole lot of production there, but this is a really strong second generation family. The dam is a half sister to plenty of stakes winners, including Miss Isella, who won multiple dirt routes, stakes races, I think at Churchill Downs even, as well as Arkansas Derby winner Sir Cherokee. So those are horses that wanted to go 2 turns on the dirt. So there is some hope that World Record is going to be able to stretch out in distance. Not that every impressive maiden winner has to stretch out. I know we always have this conversation, like Greg, like how far can they go? Can they be classic distance horses? I mean, we need some good sprinters too, and then maybe World Record just turns out to be that kind of horse, and I think that's perfectly fine. The sprint division could use some really fast horses who don't necessarily try to run as far as they possibly can.
Yeah, for sure. I just bring that up because we all know, for the most part, where the most prestigious races are. And if the trainer thinks the horse can go 2 turns, they're going to get a try. And if he doesn't get that chance, that's probably telling us something too.
Well, let's move on through some other venues that had stakes action this past weekend. Included among those is Monmouth Park, where they ran the Cliffhanger Stakes on Saturday, the 7th race of the day there, won by the Graham Motion trainee Data Man. This is a horse, Craig, who didn't really make too many waves as a 3-year-old. I mean, he competed effectively in a few stakes on the turf and the dirt, ran some decent speed figures, but he took a big step forward first time out as a 4-year-old off the layoff at Laurel. And then again here, another really strong performance because the pace of this race was not in his favor whatsoever, and he still produced this electrifying finish to get up and win.
Yeah, I was impressed with him. He's yet another one of these 4-year-olds that have blossomed. Now, he obviously didn't have the resume of some of the others. He had won a Mid-Atlantic Stakes, I think, maybe at Laurel Park. He had won off the dirt. And the one time he tried a really top horse in integration in the Virginia Derby and program trading was in there. It's not like he ran terribly. He ran a good speed figure, was just in against better horses, but he's come back a much better horse as a 4-year-old. I liked his win in in that stakes race at Laurel last time. And this one at Monmouth was pretty good. As you say, it got a pace upgrade because it was quite a slow pace in here. And he was last for the first half mile and even a little longer than that. But once he got going, he was just much the best in this field.
And when we go back to the TimeformUS chart, you'll see that it's not a pace upgrade for the entire field in this situation. It's just the way that the pace figure and speed figure algorithm works, that it's going to give extra credit to certain horses in a race that maybe overcome a situation or close especially fast on the turf. And that was certainly the case for Dataman, because you could see the long shot runner up in this race, the number 2, he holds together at the end. He actually holds off some horses that were shorter prices than him to be second in here. It's not like this is a race that came apart, except for Dataman, who rallied past the entire field to get the job done, even doing so on his left lead there, lugging in a little bit, but still had plenty of finish. And he only wins by a length, but you can see he gets a TimeformUS speed figure that is 7 points higher than everybody else in the field because he's the horse that gets that big pace upgrade due to the way he ran against the flow.
Yeah, I'm glad you note that, because if it was a race where everybody got it, the race would have that P designation. But that's not the case here. It's just one where the algorithm says, yes, he only won by a length, but the way he did it was much better. Similar to how we upgrade horses who can test a fast pace and then still run well in a dirt sprint.
We saw another big speed figure delivered on Monday at Monmouth. The final race of the day was their feature, the Mr. Prospector. Now, this was run over a very wet racetrack. It was a sloppy surface, and perhaps that played into the result a little bit for Dean Delivers, who clearly relished the going, Craig. But 125, that's a serious speed figure for a dirt sprinter.
Yeah, he's a horse who's shown some talent over the years. He's had at least 120 plus Timeform US speed figure in the past. That one also came all over and off track. He's not a horse I would trust with that 125 if he was to show up in a grade 2 on a fast track, even though he would probably have the best number. I think this one is largely because of the track, but when he gets some moisture, and particularly the more moisture, the better it seems, he's really good. And, I would be one that would take a chance with a horse like this and enter him in some better races if the weather forecast doesn't look too good, because he really relishes the off going.
Yeah, I think the last time that he was on a sloppy sealed surface was at Saratoga last summer. I believe that was the AG Vanderbilt, where he finished third behind Elite Power. You probably remember there wasn't too much in that race behind Elite Power, but he ran one of his best races that day. And maybe he's just a horse that really relishes this kind of going. But still, like you said, Craig, um, might as well take a shot in races like that in the future, because we've seen this sprint division, it can be pretty thin towards the top. It's some horses, that run big speed figures don't stay on the racetrack, or, they just have a lot of time between races. I mean, basically everybody outside of Skelly is not consistently running 125 plus Timeform US speed figures. And Skelly isn't exactly being campaigned like he's pointing towards the grade 1 races. So, I think you got to at least look at stuff like that with Dean Delivers. And I think it's interesting that, he was going out for Florida-based connections. Michael Yates was his prior trainer, and Ned Allard also has horses for these same owners. And they sent him up north to Ned Allard for this race. And maybe that's a signal that he's going to embark on a campaign up north in some of these sprints up here, because as we saw, I think it was the Run Happy that they ran a couple weeks ago at Belmont at the Big A, the Carter. These races draw really small fields, so Dean Delivers would be welcome in that division. Let's move on to Lone Star and their Memorial Day card, Craig, where they ran a ton of stakes races. Couldn't really watch too many of them live through most of your ADWs. This race being in Texas, and everything that's gone on with HISA in Texas, I don't need to rehash. But can't bet on these races, can't watch them live typically. So for the Steve Sexton Mile, that was the feature race here. We're not going to talk about that one too much. Heroic Move got the job done for Robertina Diodoro. Typically, it's a race that would be on the rundown, but just did not earn a particularly fast speed figure. I do want to mention the race that was right before that, the Texas Derby for the 3-year-olds, Craig, because EJ won the Cup. It was part of the Santa Anita Derby that I thought was decidedly subpar, but we've seen a couple of runbacks from the Santa Anita Derby be okay, especially horses that were involved in the pace. One of them, Topolo, who came back to win turning back into Laz Barrera. And now here, EJ won the Cup, who was third in that Santa Anita Derby, delivering a pretty good performance in one of these lesser derbies in the Southwest.
Yeah, I thought he ran a nice race. He got a 114 Timeform US speed figure. I almost tried to talk my wife Elsie into making the trip down to Grand Prairie for this one, but just didn't have it in me on Monday after would have been a pretty long weekend. And I almost wish I had, because they did run a very nice card there, and EJ won the Cup was part of it. As you said, that Santa Anita Derby, it seemed kind of mediocre at the time. And, we were trying looking at it as a Kentucky Derby prep race, but Stronghold came out of that race. He ran fine in the Kentucky Derby. Now EJ won the Cup. You mentioned the sprinter who ran the huge figure. So maybe that race was a little better than we thought at the time.
Yeah, and I thought Mike Smith, his ride and his patience really made the difference here, because there was a point down the backstretch and around the far turn. And you could see him, he's in the yellow with, I think, the maroon cap and sleeves there. He had to wait in traffic for a long time and actually got shuffled back a couple of positions around the far turn. But Mike Smith just seemed unbothered, knew he was on the best horse, just waited and waited. And eventually he was able to sort of, angle his way out at the top of the stretch and run down Dymatic, who is a decent horse, probably not a graded stakes quality type that we're going to see, winning races like the Jim Dam Deer, the Haskell down the line. But there are plenty of these derbies throughout the Midwest and the Southwest that you could take a look at for a horse like EJ Won the Cup. And I would imagine he could do well through them. Probably has to run a little bit faster than the 114 that he got here, but I at least like the way that he did it.
Yeah, and like you said, there were some also rans for some of the big preps, and he kind of showed that California form was able to hold up against some of those. Now, they weren't horses coming in with stellar running lines, but they were at least exiting some of the races in like Arkansas, and I think Arkansas Derby, a couple of them came out of. So it wasn't the easiest field ever. So I thought he ran well and look forward to seeing him. I imagine he'll show up in some of the lesser 3-year-old stakes as we move forward.
Now, Robertino Diodoro, who is serving a suspension, I think a provisional suspension from the Horse Racing Integrity and Welfare Unit, obviously can't compete at those tracks, but Lone Star Park being in Texas, outside of that jurisdiction. So obviously Diodoro can race there as if, it's a track basically outside of the country. The rules don't apply there. So he won a race that we're going to talk about. He also won the Steve Sexton Mile, actually nearly completed the exact on the Steve Sexton Mile. But based on the performance of Como Rebino Amoide, Craig, I'll give it that shot. Maybe this is the horse that should have been in the Sexton Mile based on the performance that he put in the second race on the card, going the same distance.
Yeah, I'm not sure where this race came from and don't really have a lot to add about it. It's sad to see for a trainer who's basically banned at most tracks. But this horse has ran 2 big races in a row now. He's won them by a combined over 20 lengths, won them pretty easily. And this time he ran a really fast speed figure, getting a 122. This was a card that was really easy to make speed figures for. So even though this one came early in the day, I don't have any problem making the number. When you look at the TimeformUS chart, it fits for all the other horses. So this horse just ran a very fast race. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with him because we don't know where he'll even be allowed to run. I think Lone Star's only open like another month and a half or so, I think. It's not like they run into August. I think it ends in July sometime. So don't know where he's going to go, but maybe he's worth adding to your stable mail because this was a quick one.
He is a Japanese bred. I think he's owned by one of the co-owners of California Chrome, who obviously stands in Japan, and he is a son of California Chrome. Seemed like, based on this performance, one of the better sons of California Chrome. Don't know where it came from. You could see from the TimeformUS chart, he had never run a speed figure like this before. Was coming off of Fasala victory at, I think it was Louisiana Downs. Had broken his maiden, a $20,000 maiden claimer at Oakland over the winter. So big performance, but like you, Craig, I'm skeptical that this horse is going to play any kind of major role in graded stakes at the tracks that we typically cover on this podcast. Let's move on to Gulfstream Park, where they ran a couple of stakes this past weekend, actually, both on Saturday, that got some pretty big speed figures. One of those was the big drama, this one going 7 furlongs for the older horses, and Octane, a horse that we had seen be successful at Oaklawn Park in the Razorback, going 2 turns a couple of starts ago before just being a little overmatched in the Oaklawn Handicap. This horse had not contested a sprint in quite some time, but turned back to the 7 furlongs here and really seemed to take to the shorter distance.
Yes, he did. And the speed figures certainly point that he took to it just really well. He ran a 121 TimeformUS speed figure, so just as fast, a tick faster than we had seen him run in a couple stakes earlier at Gulfstream and Oaklawn. So this horse is pretty versatile, and I assume the connections just realized after the Oaklawn handicap that maybe he's not quite good enough to compete with the top of the top. I mean, that race is a grade 2, but it also had like a $1.25 million purse, drew some really good horses in there. But as you said, there's kind of a dearth of talent in the sprint division at this point. So why not give him a chance? And he certainly took full advantage of it here.
Yeah, and based on this performance, he is every bit as good, at least going the 7th for a long distance, as he is going a mile and a 16th, if not a little bit better. And he was beating some decent horses in here, Craig. Obviously not graded stakes quality horses, but we had seen the likes of Loco Abario and Vivir Conalegria run some decent speed figures in the past. So this number for Octane, especially given the margin of victory, totally checks out. So I'll be interested to see what they do with him moving forward. Obviously, the pace of this race worked in his favor to a certain extent, but he's shown he's a horse that can rate and do well in longer races. So you'd imagine that would also be the case in sprints. So maybe this opens some new doors for him, this performance from last Saturday. And then the 9th race on this same card, Craig, from Saturday at Gulfstream was the Mr. Steel Stakes, going a mile and a 16th. Now, I know the turf course was very firm, got a 10 on the TimeformUS track condition rating scale, as basically as fast as it gets, but boy, still a fast time. 1:38.2 for the mile of 16th. And I know we don't care too much about raw times on this podcast, but his 1:25 TimeformUS speed figure, that pretty much checks out when you consider that he won a turf stakes by nearly 7 lengths over firm ground. That's not something you see too often.
No, and I mean, it's not like this horse hasn't shown some real talent before, particularly on the turf. He's run a little bit more in the synthetic, but he's actually 3 for 4 on the turf now. His one loss was in the Grade 1 Arlington Million, where he didn't really run very well, but his other races have been good, and this was his best yet, getting a 1:25 TimeformUS speed figure. Completely checks out when you look at this race and the other races. I mean, yeah, it was a fast track, but that's taken into account by the variant. As you see that 10 on the track condition scale, that comes directly from the track variant used for the race. So we deducted a lot of points from the raw time. This horse just seemed to really love that firm surface.
And boy, he just traveled like a winner every step of the way. The early pace was pretty quick. The top, the 2 leaders, they went out hard after each other in the opening quarter mile. It really got the announcer Pete Aiello very excited at that point in the race. But Win for the Money just sat a good trip in behind them. And I mean, look at this horse drawing off at the end. I mean, he's under wraps. I'm not saying he could have gone that much faster, but I mean, he was just never really even asked for too much run through the stretch of this race. Very visually impressive in victory. Haven't seen him on turf too much. I mean, he's won 3 of his 4 turf starts in terms of crossing the wire first. He was disqualified once. I mean, they only really tested him in the Arlington Million last summer, and that was probably too tough of a test. But he ran 5th in that race. It wasn't a bad performance at all. And I wonder what Mark Cassie's going to do. I know he's taken him up to Woodbine in the past. He ran him in that valedictory, going a mile and a half at the end of last year. Mark Cassie, I know, loves to run at Woodbine, and sometimes we'll put a horse in a spot that seems a little counterintuitive just to run at Woodbine. But maybe this horse belongs in some graded stakes races in the U.S. Later in the year. We'll see what they decide to do.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. I mean, this track at Gulfstream is probably the direct opposite of what you're going to get at Woodbine as far as the way it's configured and even the speed of the course sometimes. But as you say, that's his home base. And if he thinks he fits there, maybe that's where he'll go. But he certainly likes this hard kind of quick turf course.
Well, Craig, speaking of Woodbine, let's go there. We'll talk about a race from last Friday, the 7th race on the card. And we don't talk about too many races from Woodbine, especially races that are below the stakes level. But I think we've got to discuss this first-time starter that debuted on Friday, Play Me a Tune, a 4-year-old gelding trained by Josie Carroll. And this horse took money, got bet down to 7-5, and delivered on that hype, winning off by 11 lengths with one of the faster speed figures that you're going to see in a maiden synthetic race.
Yeah, I'm not sure where this one came from, and it wasn't a tough one to make. My assistant does Woodbine for the most part, and I'm sure he did this one, or I would have remembered it as I was making it. But as I looked over the worksheet when he sent it back, it totally fit on the day. I mean, this horse won by 11 lengths, so it's not like he didn't run a good race. He's obviously older. He was delayed a bit getting to the races as a May 4-year-old now, but it was worth the wait because he ran really well. No idea what kind of surface he's going to ultimately be best on. You would think when you get that kind of debut that maybe it'll very well be Tepeta, but he's obviously got some talent, and you never know, these horses that run well on Tepeta can run well on dirt or turf. Usually not both, but they usually can handle one or the other, and we know he can handle the Tepeta. We've seen that a lot, and there'll be plenty of spots for him to run there as well.
Yeah, one thing I'll say, Craig, this horse took a long time to get him to the races. Maybe they're not sure how many races this horse is going to have in him. And Kazushi Kimura made sure that he showed off what he could do at this race because he was not content to just win under wraps by a couple lengths. He really asked this horse. I mean, he put him down to a full out drive at the eighth hole to open up that margin. And the horse obviously had the response the way that he opened up 11 lengths on this field. But it's not like one of these performances where he's finishing up under wraps. He was really asked to do it. And maybe there's some strategy in that. We'll see where he goes next. And I should say, he's a gelding, so I think I might have been suggesting that there was some strategy to show what he could do for stallion prospects. Definitely doesn't matter being a gelding, but a little strange that they rode him that hard in this first start, but clearly he's got some talent. And as far as pedigree goes, he's by McLean's Music, a horse who also won his debut impressively and was never seen again. But I mean, there is some pedigree on the dam side, a little bit. He's a half-to horse named Awesome Overture, who was a stakes-placed router on the synthetic at Woodbine. So maybe there's some pedigree to go longer here. Pretty intriguing horse, though, Craig. I'll be interested to follow his career and where he shows up next at Woodbine.
Yeah, you mentioned McLean's Music and his debut. I'm going to have to do some research. I know he's not the first McLean's Music to come out and run like this. There's been a few others along the way that have popped big numbers first time out, winning by big margins. So he's a sire who sometimes he produces horses that can seem to do the same thing he did that first time.
Yeah, no, very impressive debut, and we'll see where he goes next. Well, that's all the racing for this past week that we'll be recapping, Craig. We will be doing our typical 2 podcast this week. I know we're putting out this Pacecast a day late with me getting back from vacation and the holiday weekend. We ended up recording this one on Wednesday, but we are planning to put out a TimeformUS forecast on Friday. I think our plan right now is to look at that stakes-laden car to Churchill Downs on Saturday, where they're running the Blame Stakes, the Audubon, some others that are, the names are escaping me now. But I think the entire Pick 5 sequence is stakes event. So looking forward to handicapping that with you on the forecast a little bit later this week, Greg, because with the Triple Crown events, the Derby and the Preakness, we haven't done too many of our typical Pick 5 handicapping forecasts lately. So very much looking forward to get back in the swing of things with that with you.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it. It's been a few weeks, it seems. So looking forward to getting back into the handicapping. As much as I like doing these Pacecasts, I'm still a bettor and a handicapper, and I enjoy the forecast just a little bit more.
Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in to the TimeformUS Pacecast this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for tuning in, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast coming up in a couple of days.